Thank you for joining us today for a virtual artist talk with photographer Jonah Allen. My name is Anna Wall. I'm the chief curator of the Pensacola Museum of Art. I'm really excited to be here today with Jonah. Jonah is currently showing his work in our DocuFlorida exhibition here at the PMA. I'm broadcasting live from the show. You can see two of Jonah's photographs from his Outfall Series above my head. DocuFlorida is an annual exhibition that invites artists to submit photographic and video works that capture the environment of Northwest Florida and the larger Gulf Coast region. The exhibition began as an ode to the EPA's sweeping documentary project, DocuMerica. Jonah's work was selected for our past two iterations of the exhibition. Based in Santa Rosa Beach, his work is intimately tied to the Gulf Coast. Jonah was raised in landlocked Atlanta, but fell in love with the area during his family's annual summer vacations in Seagrove. Learning to surf only increased his love of water and Northwest Florida's beaches. After graduating from the University of Florida, Jonah embarked on a year-long journey around the world, chasing waves and exploring the landscape. He settled full-time in Santa Rosa Beach in 2017 and has been documenting our coastline ever since. Jonah has shown in galleries throughout Florida and throughout the Gulf Coast, and received special recognition at last year's Digital Graffiti in Alys Beach. Today, Jonah is going to walk us through his body of work and describe his process. Jonah, I'll go ahead and ask you to share your screen and introduce us to your photography.
Thanks for the introduction, Anna. Let me know when you can indeed see my screen.
Great, I can see it.
All right, well, before I show you guys a slideshow of images and talk about my work a little bit, I'd like to set the context for my talk today by quoting a Canadian photographic artist named Edward Bertinsky. And he said that a picture can be latent or even non-existent and has to be brought into existence almost magically. A photograph must be made from a precise point, something that I see which only occurs from one spot, from one height, with one particular lens, and finally, only in one particular moment. And nowadays, in the context of photography, everyone's a photographer with the invention of the smartphone. So we've seen a proliferation of digital images and digital art and photography, and we're bombarded every single day with images. And for me, I think that to be considered a photographic artist or to make images that kind of stand out, the images must be made with a laser focus and really intentful. And so with that said, I'd like to take you through a slideshow of my work, and the intent or the things that I focus on in my work is water. The thread that runs through all my work is kind of the relationship between water and light. So I'm going to take you here on a short little journey of the Gulf Coast from a few different perspectives. And the first perspective we're starting with here is from the air. So what you're looking at here are what are called coastal dune lake outfalls. And so basically what a coastal dune lake outfall is, it's an intermittent connection from a lake, a coastal dune lake, with the Gulf of Mexico. So a coastal dune lake is a body of water that's found in dune ecosystems about within 2 miles of the coast. They're typically irregular shaped, and they're permanent bodies of water, and their levels of water fluctuate greatly. And also the salinity, the salt content of them, they vary greatly. So sometimes when the coastal dune lakes, they fill up with rainwater and groundwater seepage and exchanges with the Gulf from large waves or large tides, sometimes they burst into the ocean into what's called an outfall or an outflow, as pictured here in this image. So for the last 3 years, I have been working on this project about these outfalls or outflows. And as I mentioned here, most of the time the lakes do not share that connection with the ocean. And you can see one of the coastal dune lakes here in Northwest Florida, pictured in the top right of this image. In the middle of the image are the dunes, And then the left-hand side of the image, divided by the center of frame, that's the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see here in this image some seaweed and algae, and also something, there's, if you notice it, there's bands of schools of fish. And I love to photograph this subject matter from the air because it really allows you to see not only the light from a unique perspective, but just how dynamic these exchanges are with the coastal dune lakes and the Gulf. Here again is another image where the lake here, you can see it here with my mouse. It's not sharing that connection with the water, and that's the state that they're most of the time in. They're not actually connected. But when they fill up, there's just incredible process that usually lasts, a few weeks or maybe a few days, where the water flows into the Gulf. And so I've been working on a book for the last 3 years. Basically, the book it takes a viewer through the process, the life cycle of one of these outfalls from start to finish. And my working method, it uses a lot of different tools, but in this particular image, my tool is a drone. So I fly a drone up. And what's really interesting about the drone is this image is comprised of about 70 individual different overlapping photographs, which I then merge together digitally to create a larger digital negative. And from that really large digital negative, I can create a very, very large photographic print, almost mural size, because of the resolution of merging 100 photos together. And something else that's really interesting about this working method with drone is with GPS, I can make the exact same composition at different times. So this was pictured at low tide when the coastal dune lake was flowing out into the ocean. And this next image is a coastal dune lake on a high tide when the water is actually inflowing into the lake, which is a sight to behold in person. It's a really incredible dynamic process. And it's just incredibly beautiful to witness, not just from the ground, but even more so from the air. And so this next photograph kind of shows my other working method on this project that I've been doing, which is chartering helicopters. So we take the doors off of the helicopter so there's no glare from the doors and the glass, and I'm photographing these coastal dune lake outfalls from the open door of a helicopter, which is really exhilarating as a process. It's absolutely magical. It's, for me personally, it's almost a spiritual experience because it's almost like out of body. You're hovering over the earth, which you're so used to being stuck on the ground and seeing things from an eye level perspective. All of a sudden, you get up in the air and you realize just how small and insignificant you are as an individual, and you really get to see just how vast the earth and the environment is. And so I really love to photograph from this way. It also shows you, it's also a very vulnerable way to photograph. I mean, it's it's pretty scary to be hanging out of a helicopter that's moving really fast. There's rudders and wind, and there's so much going on, and it can be really kind of stressful at times because it's also very expensive to charter a helicopter. So I have to know that the images I'm going to get are going to be good in order to kind of pull the plug to make that happen. Another reason why I like to photograph these outfalls, actually, I didn't really tell you guys the reasons why. Besides for that, they're unique geographical feature in Northwest Florida. But I decided to photograph this series for two reasons. These coastal dune lakes are they're endangered. They're globally rare as it is, but they're also locally critically imperiled because humans are slowly encroaching upon these lakes, building houses on them, and these lakes are fed by groundwater, and so they're very vulnerable to groundwater pollution and different forms of pollution. Yet the contents of these lakes, the water quality is relatively still pristine. And the second reason why I started photographing this series is because um, these lakes have become a local icon to this area where I live in Northwest Florida. Specifically, it's to 30A, to that road. And a lot of other artists have, basically represented these local icons in the same way. I don't have the image pictured here, but if you were to see the image, every single artist within 100, 50-mile radius has done this exact image, just kind of copying each other and doing the same thing. And I thought, well, I actually had somebody ask me to make that image, and I told them no, and I decided to start making these images because I thought it's a really interesting way to represent this local icon, but in a different manner. And so another reason why I love to photograph them is not just because they're, you know, endangered and rare and that they're a local icon, but they're just visually intoxicating to see the waters intermix and to see the shapes and the patterns and the textures of the sand. It's really, for me, really just visually fascinating. And so the life cycle of these things that's what I'm basing the book on. That's the order of the book. Um, the last cycle of it is pictured here. And so what happens is most of the time they're unconnected. They fill up, they burst into the ocean, they flow out for a number of days or weeks, and then they reach a state of equilibrium where the lake is the same as the Gulf, the same water level. And then if there is an extra high tide in the Gulf of Mexico, then the Gulf water inflows into the lake, pictured here. And it's just, for me, absolutely stunning to see the shapes and the patterns and the textures in this manner. Um, Again, here you can see the waters intermixing, and this image was made of about 100 photographs merged together from a drone. And some may think that the water is, at first glance, is dirty. That's coming out of the coastal dune lake, but indeed it's not. That's the natural color. Excuse me. That's the natural color of the water. It is made that kind of tea, brownish, reddish color from the tannins of pine needles, because here in Northwest Florida we have a lot of different types of pine trees, which degrade and decompose and end up in these lakes like this. This image is one of the coastal dune lakes. There's 15 of them in Walton County. There's one more in Bay County, so 16 total, I believe. And this image was taken in 1949. And this next two images, you'll see the same exact lake, same oyster lake, but you can see the development here on the left in 2005 and then in 2010 from satellite imagery. And this is just showing you and kind of how we are putting pressure on these rare geological beauties. And they're really, like I said, the water quality is still relatively pristine, but they're very fragile, and that could change, very easily with how much development is going on here in Walton County. It's actually one of the fastest growing counties in the entire United States, as well as Florida. So there's so much building and so much development going on here. This is the last image I'm going to share with you guys of my Outfall series. And following on what I was just saying, you can see here in the bottom left-hand corner the large houses and the docks and the pools that are built right up against the edge of these lakes. And so we're at a point where they're still relatively pristine, but that, like I said, could change at any moment. And this image has a lot of significance to me and a lot of people in this area, because this is Western Lake, and Western Lake is the most iconic locally of these coastal dune lakes. And this is shot from about 1,000 feet, and it's also kind of like the Great Beach is kind of the local hangout beach where everyone kind of goes to hang out. So you can see here in the bottom right hand corner a lot of people on the beach and cars and whatnot. And so this image for me has a lot of significance. It has a lot of significance to people locally. And I'd also like to point out, just something that's also fascinating about photographing from the air is you really get to see, the organic geometry of the earth. You look at that here, snake-like infinity. It's almost like perfect. curvatures of it, and it kind of reminds me that Earth is kind of the greatest artist there ever was. You just have to go to the air to see it. So next, I'm going to take you guys down from the air and get your feet in the sand. Um, Here, this is an image of sand and water, an abstract image of sand patterns. And if you think about it, sand is a medium that leaves a visual trace of what's come before you. So each time you go to the beach, you can see footprints and sand patterns from the night before, from people who were at the beach prior to you being there. And with that, with those imprints, you can kind of see evidence of a little bit back into time, into history. And there's an artist, a photographic artist named Thomas Struth, who said that he likes to photograph the history of things that are available in one single moment. And that was kind of that thought kind of inspired me for this series that I call Receded Time or Veins of Sand. It inspired me because, you know, by photographing these sand patterns, you can kind of see a little bit into what happened the night before, the day before, a little bit into um, history. And to be able to make an image, that shows that, it's a really difficult thing to do because an image, a photograph, is just a single moment in time. So to be able to show some sort of indication of the passage of time is it's a really interesting thought for me. So that's one reason why I've been making these images, and also I like the abstract nature of them, the abstractions. If you didn't know the context of them, if you didn't know that there were sand patterns and water, you know, it would your mind, is left wandering. And so when you don't know what the subject matter is, it it leaves a very interesting kind of inner dialogue because your mind has to try to figure out what exactly you're looking at. And that process of figuring out what you're looking at, for me, is really, really interesting. Or I like to see the viewer experience that process. And something that also is common, or a common theme throughout my photographs, is that um, it's all most of the photographs that I show, um, they all are moments that are they're very fleeting. They're almost ephemeral. They're hard to capture because they don't really occur. The culmination of all the factors lining up, they don't occur very often. It's the confluence of first and foremost light, but also the swell direction, the tides, the winds, um, and all these other environmental weather factors that make these images possible. So I'm putting myself, the way to make these images is to put yourself, to understand what those factors are, and then to put yourself in those combination of factors time and time again, consistently. And you're rewarded with something like this, which is, these are, it's a sand pattern on the shoreline, but it's in fact in the shape of a whale's tail. And I know I'll never be able to make this image again. It was there, and now it's gone. And with that said, for me, I have kind of three criteria um, that I have for an image to be interesting to me before I share it with people, before I put it out in the world. And the first criteria is that the subject matter of the image has to be really fascinating. You have to be able to stare at it for a really long time and not get bored of it. And, your eye can wander around the subject matter just infinitely, or at least my eye. The second criteria is that I mentioned a second ago that the the moment that is photographed can't occur again. The image is not repeatable. Nobody else, including myself, could ever make that same image again because the the factors will never align the way they did. And then the last kind of criteria for an interesting image for me is that the image has to make you feel an emotion. At the end of the day, art is about, communicating, at least for me, emotion and what I'm feeling. And so if the image doesn't make the viewer feel an emotion, then for me, it's not interesting. So with that said, with those three criteria, um, I'm going to take you guys into my last series I'm going to show you today, into the water, where I photograph in the water. And this series is called Peaks. Peaks being these little peaks of waves, but it's also kind of like a peak moment of anticipation right before the wave kind of crashes and curls and touches down into the water. And again, these are our fleeting moments. But for me, I'm fascinated by the relationship between water and light. And I love to consistently put myself in these places where the light and the water are just interacting in ways that are just absolutely mind-boggling. The textures and the shapes and the patterns that form, they're just so beautiful. And so here's me working in the water. It's an underwater housing with a glass kind of porter. And then my digital camera is inside it. And it's kind of funny. I still get scared every time I go in the water because it's like all this really expensive equipment underwater. It's kind of ironic. Um, that's another one of those peak images. Um, I with these images, you might notice a theme visually through them, and that they're kind of like high contrast. But I'm not actually doing that by post processing. It's actually the quality of light that I'm photographing these images and or making these images. The quality of light for me to make one of these images, I'm looking for a very, very, very specific quality of light that only occurs in kind of one way, which is the light has to be very low and close to the horizon. If not, actually, like here, actually, this image has the sun in it right there. It's literally setting, and when the sun is that low, it creates these you can really see the lines of each individual part of the wave. And I love to see the lines because it makes it your eyes can wander more in the image. And speaking of quality of light and the factors that it takes to make these images, um, this specific image was made actually after the sun had already set below the horizon. And, you know, in photography, you have to have a lot of light to make an image to freeze a moment like this at a high shutter speed. But what's interesting is this image was actually made um, with these series of factors. There were north winds, and then there were these cirrus clouds, which are clouds that form at like 18,000 feet. And it's a really incredible phenomenon that if you're a local in the Gulf Coast, you've probably seen this, but you don't know what factors align. And the factors are those things I just said. But what happens is after the sun sets below the horizon, the cirrus clouds reflect the sun's light in a really bright, dynamic way. And the sky looks almost like fire. It's like very fiery. So I love to photograph uh, glassy, like very calm waves when in that quality of light. And this next image, actually not this one, the very next image is photographed in that quality of light right after the sun is set, and it really just the reflection of the light from the clouds really highlights the contours of the wave. And this is going to be the last image I'm going to share with you today on our little journey through the Gulf Coast. And actually, I made this last image just a few days ago. And again, I'll never be able to make it again. It was just a moment in time, and now it's gone. And one thing I'd like to leave you with is kind of what my hope my work does. And on a surface level, if someone collects a piece of art and puts it in their home, or they see it online or in print or somewhere, um, my goal is for that image to make that person feel emotion, hopefully an emotion similar to the one I felt when I was creating the work. And so if the work can make a collector or viewer feel, an intense emotion, then the work on a service level has done its job. But on a little bit of a deeper level, you can't really get people to care about things unless they have a firsthand experience in them. And so, it's my hope that by someone seeing an image, they may think to go to that place where the image is made, whether it's the ocean or the dune lake or the shoreline. And maybe if they experience that landscape firsthand, or that part of nature firsthand, then maybe with that experience they might develop a respect for it. Just maybe with that respect, they might care about the future of it. So with that said, thanks for listening, and I'm going to turn it back to Anna. I think she has some questions.
Thank you, Jonah. That was really excellent. Thank you for sharing your work with us. And looking at it and knowing your love for water and how you got started by visiting the Gulf Coast and learning to surf. When did you start photographing the water?
I began photographing the water when I started taking photos. I was in I just started high school, I believe, and a friend of mine was given an underwater camera, like one of the very first ones you could actually take underwater, like not have a housing. It was very, it's like a 1 megapixel camera or something like that. But I borrowed it from him, and with that camera, I was able to capture these moments in the water. And I didn't know it, but subconsciously, I was capturing these emotional moments for me, and I could take that photograph back to me where I lived in Atlanta, which is landlocked, and I could have kind of a memory of the ocean, which was like my kind of favorite place to be. The purpose of my work has changed, dramatically since then, but that was kind of like I started photographing when I was about, I don't know, maybe 13 years ago, and I was in just starting high school or middle school.
And I know that your travels around the world and your experience surfing and being physically in different types of environments really made you feel connected to the landscape. And how did that change and grow when you turned your camera onto the landscape? Just thinking about you being physically in the water with the camera, how that experience is different from surfing and being in the environment in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, something that parallels the two is that, they're both being in the water, photographing that, and surfing. It's a time when I'm 110% in the present, not thinking about the future, not thinking about the past, just really intently focused on the present. But by when I photograph in the water, um, it's a different type of relationship, um, in that I there's all these subtleties that occur that you might overlook if you're just not uh, being not in tune with them, or being aware, not looking for them. I don't know if that makes sense, but um,
Your interaction with light in particular, the weather. You talk a lot about how you get the shots, the difficulty of getting the shots. Um, it seems like a really delicate balance between planning ahead, order reserving a helicopter to get the aerial shots, but then also being able to be spontaneous and respond when all the conditions line up just right.
right.
So how do you handle that balance and work with your environment?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think um, I've kind of based my life around putting myself in really interesting moments and situations, which is, and everything's a sacrifice. There's often opportunity cost to everything. So it's a certain amount of sacrifice of other things in my life that enables me to kind of put myself in these really beautiful and interesting moments. But it's just like anything worth doing, any practice, any discipline. It takes commitment to um, persistently show up. I wake up at pre-sunrise every day, and I'm out there checking the conditions firsthand to get a kind of a qualitative read on what the how the conditions are aligning for that day, to make to hopefully make the images I want to make that I have in my head. Because a lot of the images I want to make are kind of, not all of them are pre-thought out, but a lot, but the quality of light and the what I'm trying to photograph is kind of, it's pre kind of figured out. And then there's obviously spontaneity in the moment. But yeah, I'm constantly not only showing up, but researching and using lots of tools, whether it's weather charts or maps, different types of satellite imagery, to figure out when the swell and the swell direction and the wind and the tide and the light is going to be, when they're of certain qualities and they're all going to align. Then I can try to make the images I want to make. And if I don't do my research, and then I'm not rewarded with the images I want to make. And I'm also, if I'm chartering a helicopter, which is, quite expensive, it's like, anywhere $600 to $800 an hour, I'm up there for 2 hours. If I don't do my research, then I do that. And then, so it's a large expense to justify if I don't do my research. So always constantly, just uh, looking at the weather, really.
And how does technology affect your work?
Oh
Thinking
my,
about new developments in drone technology, you mentioned looking at satellite imagery, developments in underwater camera.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh. So when I was I went to University of Georgia and I studied art there. I was photographing large format, 4 by 5, with the bellows, and you get one, you get two slides, and I can't possibly imagine photographing large format in the water, let alone from a helicopter with the shakes and the everything. So I mean, it's incredible with the way the digital photography and technology has come today. With it's absolutely incredible. There's no way I'd be able to make the images I make without the progression in technology, whether it's the underwater housings or um, the digital camera itself, or the ability to attach a digital camera to a unmanned aerial object and fly it with a remote control that uses cell service to connect. It's just absolutely remarkable, the technology we have today to that we have so much technology today at our fingertips to use in so many different ways. And it's something that's really even cool with the drone is like, the thing about photographing a helicopter or photographing from the water is that, like, it's really spiritual. Because for me, like, I'm in the moment, I'm there, I'm seeing what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing in the viewfinder. But photographing from the drone is that kind of antithesis of that. It's like completely removed from it. You're on the ground, but you're up in the air. And so I prefer to have the more spiritual experience where I'm experiencing what I'm seeing in the viewfinder. But the beautiful thing about a drone is that I can conduct research and figure out, okay, what does this look like? Do I want to charter a helicopter, to this spot, because I can see it with the drone first. But also with basically mapping technology, I'm I'm able to basically map areas if the subject matter doesn't move too much and too fast. Like I said earlier, I can basically determine a composition on a map. It can be acres, it can be miles wide. I mean, and then I can program the drone to take 100 images overlapping of that area and then merge them together to create a really large digital negative to make a mural size print. And so the the resolution we have to make larger prints, which is what I love to do, it wouldn't be possible, even even 5 years ago. It wasn't really possible what you can do right now. So the development of technology, it's rapidly changing so fast.
It's incredible. And I know you work often in large format. You can see the image behind you, but I know your images go all the way up to almost mural size. And is that an impulse you're always trying to get bigger as printing technology gets better? Can you speak a little bit about your preference to work as a large format photographer?
Yeah, absolutely. um the number one reason why I like to work large is because it has more impact on the viewer when you're engulfed by a really large large, photographic print. But also, the things, that I'm photographing, whether it's the landscape or the water, or whatever it is, when you're out there experiencing it firsthand, it has such an impact on you. Part of the reason because of the scale, it's just absolutely so vast. You're just engulfed by the ocean or the landscape. And I want to at least try to attempt to match that. I mean, nowhere near, but attempt to match that scale with the scale of the photograph. And by printing small, it kind of does the subject matter a disservice, in my opinion. So it's kind of it's about the emotional impact, and it's also about just being the integrity to the subject matter.
Yeah. And we, of course, love all the work you're doing in the Gulf Coast and capturing our landscape here. Do you have dream locations that you'd like to visit and photograph?
Oh man, if you guys saw my materials, like if you saw my Google map, like not just Google Maps, but these bunch of different satellite imagery. But yeah, in my free time, I just kind of scour and explore the Earth from a really high resolution satellite imagery. If you saw my apps, you would just see just plethora. I mean, thousands, if not tens of thousands, of pins all around the world of dream locations that I can't wait to photograph. And so yeah, right now I'm kind of narrowly focused on just the Gulf Coast, specifically just the coastal dune lakes. I'm working on that book. I've been working on it for 3 years. I'm almost done. I'm basically almost done shooting it, and now it's about designing it and assembling it and printing it and distributing it. And after I'm done with that book, which hopefully will be, just the process of the life cycle of the book, I don't know how long that will be, but after that life cycle of that book is done, I already have 2 more book, like pretty solid book ideas. I mean, it's my opinion. That's subjective. That I'm going to work on. And then, yeah, basically, I'm just going to continue working on series of works until they become books. And then I'll be on to the next book or exhibition, or series of work.
That's great. So just a kind of last question, since we are doing this interview in the context of our DocuFlorida exhibition. I know in your artist statement, especially kind of early on, you really were driven by the impulse to capture the environment untouched by mass development. And I know more recently you have shown the changes in the environment that are man-made and how developments are encroaching on certain areas. So I was wondering if you could speak about how that has become part of your mission and how you developed that work.
Yeah, so although I love to photograph, the landscape kind of untouched by mass development, I also photograph the landscapes that are really touched and really altered, by humans. And I didn't show any of that work today because I wanted to take you guys on a kind of ephemeral experience of the Gulf Coast. But I started that work because I kind of have a bit of I wouldn't say an environmental mission. Like I wouldn't call myself like an environmentalist from like I don't know, from a nature standpoint, but just that like, we're really altering the earth. And by just showing the untouched areas, that's kind of not accurate to our time. You know, maybe if I, 200 years ago, those images might be accurate to that time, or 300 years ago. But we have we are rapidly altering the face of this planet on a daily basis. Um, we're faced with so many different issues in climate change, and to just show one side of the spectrum, that's kind of not accurate. And it's kind of like ignoring the problem, I guess. So it's important to me to try to show some of the other sides. It's two sides. Really, in reality, it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So I want to show both sides.
Well, before we go today, is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners about your work?
Well, I just want to say thanks for anyone who tuned in, and thank you, Anna, and Pensacola Museum of Art for for including me in this talk today. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoy sharing my work with people. But yeah, if you want to see more of my work, you can or if you watch this, please send me an email or a message on social media and reach out. Um, and look forward to connecting with all you guys.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jonah. This was wonderful. And for everyone that's listening, Jonah's work will be on view at the Pensacola Museum of Art under DocuFlorida exhibition through the end of August. So stop by and come see it. You can also view some of his images on our website. Thank you, Jonah.
Thank you, Anna.